welcome to another edition of the Congressional Western Caucus's Chairman's Chat. I mean Chairman's because today we are very honored to have with us the Chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, Mr. Jason Smith from the great state of Missouri, or is it Missouri?
It's definitely Missouri.
Missouri.
Yeah.
I could get you in trouble with some folks back in the state. You represent the 8th District of Missouri, right?
That's exactly right.
So we're going to talk a little bit to Jason, Chairman Smith, about the Ways and Means Committee, why it's important, and some of the things that you do. So Jason, if you wouldn't mind explaining to folks, Ways and Means, what is that and why should I care about that?
Sure. Well, Dan, it's always a pleasure to be with you. The Ways and Means Committee is actually the oldest committee in Congress.
Oh, is that right?
It's the only committee in Congress that our powers are actually written in Congress when it comes to tax policy.
Written you mean
in the Constitution? Yeah,
oh, right.
And so that's pretty powerful. Like, no tax bill can originate in anywhere except in the House Ways and Means Committee.
I mean, not the Senate.
Not in the Senate. And so even yesterday when they were working on their NDAA over there, we had senators contacting me like, is this considered of revenue? Will you do a blue slip because they can't even add an amendment over there that deals with revenue.
So I'm going
it has to come from the House.
Ask you to explain blue slip. What do you mean?
Yeah, blue slip is whenever it's basically saying that's unconstitutional. That amendment would never be able to become law because it did not originate from the House. And so the Ways and Means Committee can issue a blue slip on that. But it's a little bit complicated. But our committee has sole jurisdiction over tax, sole jurisdiction over trade. We also have a portion of healthcare, half of Medicare. We have a few welfare programs and all of Social Security. So it keeps us pretty busy. We also have a very aggressive oversight of the IRS and CMS and several different agencies.
So you got a pretty broad portfolio.
We do. It keeps us a little busy over there.
Well, thanks for taking some time to spend with me today.
Never too busy for you.
Well, appreciate that. And people in the Western Caucus appreciate that.
Right.
So you mentioned one of the things that I wanted to focus on today, and that's trade. Certainly important to rural communities throughout the country. You know, we as a country, I think we have less or about 1/6 of the land mass on the globe, and we're the largest exporter of food in the world. And that's a huge testament to our producers in the United States, some of the innovation, the progressive nature of our farmers and producers is pretty amazing. But this trade, we can't eat, I always tell people, we can't eat all the apples that we produce in Washington State, we've got to sell them. So trade's huge. In fact, in my state, 40% of the jobs are somehow related to international trade. It's pretty amazing.
That's crucial. We've changed the way that we've run the Ways and Means Committee. My first committee as chairman was actually to do a field hearing outside of Washington to hear from small businesses and farmers.
Noticed you've been doing a lot of that.
We've done 5 of them. Yeah. The 2 most recent ones have been all focused on trade. Oh. Our last one was in Kimball, Minnesota. We were in a livestock barn. And Republicans and Democrat members of our committee have showed up at every one of them. And that one was all focused on trade, supply chains, and critical minerals, something extremely important. And when you look at the security of our nation, we need to make sure that we are secure in 3 really important areas. Okay. And that is our food supply, that is our energy, and it's in our healthcare, medicines, pharmaceuticals, and medical supplies. A country that's not secure in those 3 things is dependent on someone else. And we need to make sure that our supply chains make sure we're secure in this. And if we can't produce those items, we need to make sure our allies and friends, not countries that want to burn our flag. Right. And so that is a big part of the process right now. We just passed the most bipartisan trade agreement in the history of Congress, and hardly anyone's talking about that, and that's a trade agreement with Taiwan. Not one Republican, not one Democrat voted against it in the House or Senate, and it's sitting on the president's desk as we speak. So that's extremely important. That's also important from a security issue. But you look at what Taiwan purchases from the United States when it comes to agriculture. We need to open more markets, and that's extremely important for our farmers. We need to make sure our trade policy is focused on farmers, the American worker, and definitely the American manufacturer.
I'm glad you brought that up because it seems to me that this administration could be doing more in the area of international trade. Particularly, I see the agricultural side of things and the trade agreements that we have in place. A lot of them are not being enforced like they should be. We could be expanding our trade relationships around the globe. Are you doing anything in your committee around that, or do you agree with that kind of sentiment?
I've been very disappointed with this administration. I feel like that they're out to lunch when it comes to our trade policy. We have to engage. We don't even have a trade agreement with the United Kingdom.
I know. Yeah.
That's maddening. And so these are things we need to look at, and we also need to make sure that the countries that we do have trade agreements with, that they're abiding to the agreements. For example, USMCA.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up.
Big trade agreement that we passed. My first delegation as chairman of the Ways and Means Committee was to Mexico. That was my very first stop. We spent 3.5 hours meeting with the president of Mexico, raising a couple issues on trade, but one from the GMO corn issue, where they're literally trying to violate the trade agreement and stop purchasing U.S. corn because they think it's poisoning their people. It absolutely is not poisoning. We want people to abide by science. They need to abide by trade agreements. If a trade agreement's not enforced, the trade agreement actually hurts the farmers and the American worker more. Canada needs to be held their feet to the fire in what they're doing to the dairy industry.
Right.
These are different aspects. I'm glad in Mexico we called on this administration to enter into a dispute settlement with Mexico.
A resolution process.
From the resolution process, and they've activated that, and they're in the process right now. We have to make sure our trading partners do follow, and we have to make sure those trade agreements are completely enforced. And then we need to open up the new markets and try to lift some trade barriers. But we need to make sure that it's fair trade as well.
So let me bring up something. I'm on the select committee for the Communist Chinese Party. And certainly there's a lot of challenges in our relationship with China. But one of those things that had been frustrating from an agricultural perspective, they're not keeping up with their commitments on what they said they would buy from us of our agricultural products. Do you guys touch that area as well?
Absolutely. Phase 1 agreement, they are not purchasing the amount of agriculture products that they want. We've been pushing this administration to just even document why they're not, what amount have they not followed through on. We know it's a substantial amount, and we need to hold their feet to the fire. We have to figure out ways to strategically decouple from China. When you're looking at the trade relationship with them, there's a lot of things that we can look at, and de minimis is a good place to start.
Well, one of the things we learned during the pandemic is not to be too dependent on any one place for anything.
Yep.
And we found that China is one of those places that we found ourselves way too dependent on. So strategically, we need to spread our where we get things, where we source products, and where we sell things as well.
We need to encourage, if the product cannot be manufactured or grown in the United States, it needs to be in our hemisphere. We need to promote manufacturing in South and Central America. We need to make sure that it's more of a competitive advantage to manufacture there than in communist China.
Yeah, good point. Strategically, that's a really important point. So, well, I appreciate you taking a few minutes, Jason, to talk about I didn't know this, the oldest committee in the U.S. House of Representatives, the Ways and Means Committee, and explaining some of the other things that you do besides just tax policy, but trade, international trade, which is so important, like I said, to rural communities in Missouri and Washington, all throughout the United States. So thank you very much for that. Any last thoughts you'd like to leave our viewers before we go?
It's just always good to be with you, and we appreciate the work you do for the Western Caucus.
Well, thank you, Jason. Appreciate that. And good work in the Ways and Means Committee, and look forward to continue working with you.
Thank you, sir.